Good morning and welcome to our coverage of the Israel-Hamas war as the crisis in the Middle East continues. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Coming up, Israeli tanks continue to mass on Gaza border as tension mounts. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel is going to win the conflict with full force. Plus, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak meets with Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince in Riyadh as he heads to Egypt for more talks on the crisis in Israel. Thank you for joining us. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Israeli tanks continue to mass near the border between Israel and Gaza on Friday today, as Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant told troops gathered at the Gaza border they will soon see the Palestinian enclave from inside, suggesting an expected ground invasion with the aim of annihilating Hamas. Israel appeared to be getting closer to a full-scale invasion of Gaza, a densely populated enclave ruled by Hamas. The Israeli military has massed troops and equipment near the Gaza border for a few days now. Israel has pounded Gaza with airstrikes and put the enclave's 2.3 million people under siege after Hamas gunmen rampaged through Israeli towns and kibbutzes on October the 7th, killing 1,400 Israelis and taking scores of hostages. Israel has released footage said to be strikes carried out on targets it said belonged to different groups, including Lebanon's Hezbollah and Palestinian group Hamas. In a post on Telegram, the Israeli army says the strikes on targets belonged to Hezbollah operatives, which included an observation point facing the sea, in response to shooting attacks that took place on Wednesday, October the 18th. Hezbollah, an ally of Hamas and Islamic Jihad, which both have operatives in Lebanon, said it carried out attacks including a guided missile strike against an Israeli army vehicle in the Israeli border town of Metula. In a separate Telegram post, the Israeli army said it had continued to strike buildings said to belong to Hamas, with targets including anti-tank missile launching posts, tunnel shafts, intelligence infrastructure, and command centers. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is confident of victory as he says Israel will deal harsh blows to its enemies during his meeting with the Golani Brigade at the border with Gaza. He told the Israeli Military Infantry Brigade as he traveled to meet those stationed at the border, "We are going to win with full force." Earlier, Mr. Netanyahu says the attack from Gaza by the Hamas, which killed 1,400 people in Israel, was aimed at derailing attempts to establish a wider peace in the region. In northern Israel, near the border with Lebanon, Israeli army shelled towards Lebanese lands as rockets were launched from the other side. The military said at least 20 rockets and anti-tank missiles had been fired from Lebanon and that its forces were retaliating with artillery. U.S. President Joe Biden has asked Americans to spend billions more dollars to help Israel fight Hamas. In a televised White House speech late on Thursday, President Biden says Hamas seeks to annihilate Israel's democracy. The president, who made an 8-hour visit to Israel on Wednesday, also stressed the urgency of getting relief to Palestinian civilians in Gaza who lack food, water, and medicine. President Biden said he will ask Congress today to approve extra funding for Israel. A source familiar with the matter says it will total about $14 billion.
We're facing an inflection point in history. One of those moments where the decisions we make today are going to determine the future for decades to come. As I told the families of Americans being held captive by Hamas, we're pursuing every avenue to bring their loved ones home. As president, there is no higher priority for me than the safety of Americans held hostage. The terrorist group Hamas unleashed pure, unadulterated evil in the world. But sadly, the Jewish people know perhaps better than anyone that there is no limit to the depravity of people when they want to inflict pain on others. In Israel, I saw people who are strong, determined, resilient, and also angry, in shock and in deep, deep pain. I also spoke with President Abbas, the Palestinian Authority, and reiterated that the United States remains committed to the Palestinian people's right to dignity and to self-determination. The actions of Hamas terrorists don't take that right away. Like so many other, I'm heartbroken by the tragic loss of Palestinian life, including the explosion at the hospital in Gaza, which was not done by the Israelis. We mourn every innocent life lost. We can't ignore the humanity of innocent Palestinians who only want to live in peace and have an opportunity. Hamas' stated purpose for existing is the destruction of the state of Israel and the murder of Jewish people. Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. Hamas uses Palestinian civilians as human shields, and innocent Palestinian families are suffering greatly because of them. Iran is supporting Russia in Ukraine, and is supporting Hamas and other terrorist groups in the region, and will continue to hold them accountable, I might add.
President of the United States, Joe Biden, senior research fellow Jean-Luc Seman at the Middle East Institute, National University of Singapore, points out the key takeaways from President Biden's speech. Now, President Biden launched a new mission to convince Americans they should spend billions more on supporting Israel and Ukraine in their wars, arguing that only the U.S.'s involvement can prevent global chaos in the televised speech that we just heard. Now, Jordan's foreign minister says that the country fears the worst is yet to come in the Gaza war, with no signs of success in efforts to de-escalate. In remarks at a press conference with his German counterpart, Ayman Safadi, he says the war would have catastrophic repercussions and urged protecting the region from the danger of its expansion. Mr. Safadi told the media the catastrophe will have painful consequences in coming periods, and added that diplomatic efforts were not yielding any results in ending it. The Jordanian diplomat says the kingdom will confront with all its means a mass displacement of Palestinians that results in demographic or geographic changes to the region. The conflict has stirred a long-standing fear in Jordan, home to a large population of Palestinian refugees and their descendants, that a wider conflagration will give Israel the chance to implement a transfer policy to expel Palestinians en masse from the West Bank. Meanwhile, Germany will increase relief for Palestinian civilians in Gaza by 50 million euros, Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock says, as the humanitarian crisis worsens for the 2.3 million people trapped there. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. Mr. Guterres said this during a press conference in Cairo with Egyptian Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry. According to him, Gaza needs aid at scale and on a sustained basis. He also called on Hamas to release the hostages it seized on October the 7th and on Israel to give unrestricted access to aid.
In the face of this humanitarian catastrophe, I'm calling for two immediate humanitarian actions. To Hamas, for the immediate and unconditional release of the hostages. To Israel, for immediate and restricted access of humanitarian aid to respond to the most basic needs of the people of Gaza. And as appalling as those attacks have been, they cannot justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. Both of my humanitarian appeals are essential in and of themselves. And to help realize these two appeals, I am calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. For nearly 2 weeks, the people of Gaza have gone without any shipments of fuel, food, water, medicine, and other essentials. Civilians in Gaza desperately need core services and supplies, and for that we need rapid, unimpeded humanitarian access. We need food, water, medicine, and fuel now. We need it at scale, and we need it to be sustained.
وده إشادة بالجهود التي تطلع بها الأمم المتحدة لمحاولة إيصال المساعدات الإنسانية لغزة. وأضم صوتي للسكرتير العام في أن استهداف المقرات الأممية.
Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has stressed to British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak that the kingdom considers targeting civilians in Gaza a heinous crime and a brutal attack. Mohammed bin Salman met with Prime Minister Sunak in Riyadh, even as the UK Prime Minister plans to visit Egypt as well. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak followed US President Joe Biden with a visit to Israel earlier to demonstrate Western support for the war against Hamas. Israel has put the Gaza Strip's 2.3 million people under siege and bombarded the enclave in strikes that have killed thousands and made more than 1 million homeless. Joining now is Mr. Denis Riva. Joining us now, Mr. Denis Riva, a researcher, Institute for Security Studies in Pretoria from South Africa. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
This current conflict in the Middle East may go down in history as being as defining as the Holocaust, World War II, or even any of the most devastating wars in history. That being said, you're in South Africa, and we've seen protests in South Africa, possibly for and against the Palestinians or the Israelis. South Africa being a melting pot of people from around the world, especially, I think, Joburg or Durban. What's the current sentiment like with the Middle East population where you are?
I think South Africa has a history of a pro-Palestine stance, a support for the Palestine cause. So I think officially we see a very consistent position from the government. And of course, this position is echoed by some of the parties, the African National Congress, the leading party, but also one of the major parties that is currently in the opposition, the EFF. At the same time, the DA, the official opposition party in South Africa, has come to condemn the attack of Hamas that took place on the October 7th, and is seen as taking a more pro-Israeli position. So I think politically it's very clear, but when it comes to the populations, it's a bit difficult to establish exactly where the allegiances lie. Of course, the almost 500,000 population of Muslims that live in South Africa are primarily in support of Palestine and condemn Israeli actions and Israeli retaliation. There's also about 50,000 Jewish people living in South Africa, but it's hard to say whether all of them share the position. The best we can do right now is perhaps go back to 2017 when a public opinion poll was run on the Palestine and Israel conflict, and at the time the results showed that about an even split of slightly less than 50% supporting Palestine and slightly 50% then of people supporting Israel. But of course, this was in 2017, and a lot has happened. And I think the attack that took place on October the 7th by Hamas and the response by Israel has perhaps shifted these positions. It's a bit difficult to say, but we certainly see publicly, when it comes to governments, we see a higher support for Palestine. And a vocal support at that.
So are you saying that the official position of the South African government is support for Palestine?
Well, it has been an official position. I must clarify, more recently, the president of South Africa, Isreal-Hamas, came out to condemn the actions of Hamas, but then he quickly followed up by saying that he also condemns the violence that took place and the actions of Israel. This is so. In terms of a public stance of the government, South Africa attempted to be more level-headed, more nuanced. But if you listen to political parties, ANC in particular, we see a more biased position, if I can call it biased, a less balanced position in support of Palestine. Of course, there are historic reasons for that. Historically, the ANC the Liberation Movement had very close ties with PLO, and then later, after free and independent elections in South Africa, established a direct formal relations with PLO and later Hamas. We've seen South Africa taking a clear pro-Palestine position at the UN and being very vocal about its support for free Palestinian state, referring to the relationship between Palestine and Israel as an apartheid relationship. And this narrative, of course, is very popular, and it receives a lot of tractions in South Africa. It reminds people of South Africa of the horrid days of apartheid in this country. So I think officially, South African position has been consistent in support of Palestine, while calling for the end of hostilities and end of conflict. But it's a bit more biased towards Palestine than Israel. And of course, just a quick to add quickly, in 2018, South Africa made a decision to downgrade its diplomatic relationship with Israel, and Pretoria didn't have an ambassador in Israel since then. And that was a response to the actions of Israel that is being seen again as a continuation of this apartheid system and practices that South Africa opposes.
Is that the current situation? That South Africa still doesn't have an ambassador to Israel?
That is correct.
Okay, that speaks volumes. But now let's look at today and what we know now concerning the conflict. Over 5,000 people killed on both sides, over 10,000 injured, according to the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Thousands on the Israeli side as well, not as much injured. 203 hostages now, according to the IDF, hostages taken, 30 children inclusive, elderly people as well in that hostage situation that is active in Gaza. Now, the die seems to be cast that these two sides have an intractable position. The visit of Rishi Sunak, the visit of Olaf Scholz, the visit of President Joe Biden, do you think it has helped any?
I think, well, we have to understand that these visits in the context. Israel it seems to be set to continue or start with a military operation on the ground in Gaza, and that decision has resulted in very negative reactions from neighbor states of Israel, including Egypt, Iran. Iraq. There were Taliban made an official statement on that. So it was not well received in the Arab world, and I think these visits by the US and the UK are meant to stabilize the position and so ensure that the ground operation that Israel is planning doesn't result in a massive full-scale war that involves other countries in the region. I think it should be seen in that context. Of course, in that sense, we've also seen some positives in terms of humanitarian aid being deployed, or discussions about the need to deploy humanitarian aid. But the primary objective, I believe, is to ensure that the Israeli operation in Gaza doesn't turn into a full-scale war, which would be, of course, damaging not just for the region but for the whole world, given the importance of this region for energy security.
Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia has declared vociferous support for the Palestinians. He's also condemned the attacks of Israel on Gaza. This is coming on the heels of the expected normalization of relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia, for which he seemed to be very pleased when speaking with international media that this was going ahead. And that was about a month ago. But now that this has happened, it's been said that effectively this has put a spanner in the works of that normalization of the Saudi Arabia-Israel foreign relations. Is that correct?
No, of course. No, the timing of the attack, whether it was meant as such or not, has been very. All the casualties aside, has been very unfortunate for Israel diplomatically, as Israel was on the brink of reaching a diplomatic breakthrough with its Arab neighbors, which was seen as a very important step. I think it's important to understand that the region has a very complex geopolitical divides and tensions, not that extend beyond Israel and the plight of the Palestinian people. Iran plays a role, and Iran is a major player and is seen as a rival by Saudi Arabia. There is an internal division politically between Saudi Arabia and Qatar, with Iran also playing a role. So I think in that regard, we've seen some positive steps, but of course, as long as Israel is committed to continue with this ground operation or proceed with this ground operation, it will complicate the relationship with its Arab neighbors. However, it all depends on the outcomes. The situation is dynamic. We may see things change over the next couple of weeks, and that, of course, will affect the stance of the United Arab Emirates and other countries.
Ismail Haniyeh, one of the leaders of Hamas living in exile, I believe, or self-imposed exile in Qatar, had called for a global day of protest after the October 7th incident. That didn't seem to have happened. The most support or outrage that has been expressed against Israel and for the Palestinians happened because of the hospital explosion, which Israel and the US have said that it's not the Israelis that caused that explosion, that it was a misfired Islamic Jihad rocket. Now, do you think that possibly that this group, Hamas, is banking on all the Arab nations coming together to support it against Israel for its demands to be met? What happened, the attack on the October 7th, of course, draw the attention to Gaza, to Hamas, and to Israel. But this conflict has been going on for a very long time, and the mutual hostilities have existed for a very long time. So it's not. I think when it comes to other countries' position on this war, they have been more or less set in stone for a long time. I don't think any country has drastically changed its position in following the incident on the October 7th. On that note, I think when it comes to the war, of course, Hamas will use any attacks, any missile strikes by Israel in a propaganda campaign. It is to be expected. It's only natural. I think it's propaganda and warfare go hand in hand, and each state will
will employ this tool to get more support. But I don't think that necessarily countries will change their position in that regard. More likely than not, countries will ignore the evidence as it is being presented and will stick to the narrative that supports their worldview and their claims. I mean, with regard to the attack on the hospital, there is still a lot of uncertainty with regard to what exactly happened. I would be reluctant to discuss that matter any further. The attack itself, of course, it's a tragedy and human lives were lost. But regardless of what actually happened, it's clear that Hamas will use this in their propaganda campaign. And I don't use propaganda in a negative sense. I use propaganda in the sense that they will use these as an examples to highlight the results, the consequences of Israeli strikes. And even if the hospital was not bombed directly by Israel, it can be attributed to the broader military campaign launched by Israel after the Hamas attack. And if the ground operation proceeds, we will see more instances of this taking place.
Of course. Let me quickly mention what the Israelis have said happened and what the United States seems to be corroborating. They offered audio evidence. According to them, they intercepted a conversation between Hamas operatives, expressing surprise that one of the rockets had hit the area near the hospital, or the parking lot of the hospital from a cemetery. And it was also, that was just the preliminary investigations. They also said that those preliminary investigations seemed to reveal that the manner of the crater that was as a result of the explosion is not of the sort of Israeli munition, and it was that of another sort. So, and they provided that evidence through the satellite imagery, through the intercept knowledge, and through the preliminary analysis, which now, if one is to be objective and not sentimental, the Palestinians, the Hamas, should provide, if they also provided some sort of evidence that they can muster to determine who exactly was responsible for that explosion. But moving on to the wider context of what's happening around the world, we see that a lot of attention has swayed away from the Ukraine-Russia war. And now there's a lot of focus on this crisis in the Middle East. One wonders what will happen next for the attention from this crisis to go somewhere else. But 2 wars in 1 year, or less than 2 years, is more than enough, don't you think? Do you think this is making, well, it's an obvious question, but if not handled properly, is this making the world a less safe place?
Well, of course, I guess it's as you mentioned, it's a very obvious question, and there is an obvious answer to this question. Unfortunately, we are seeing a number of long-standing tensions around the world that are now coming into play, and in part of the reason why we're seeing all of these conflicts emerging right now is because we're seeing an inability of international systems to prevent these conflicts. I mean, you mentioned Russia and Ukraine. You mentioned Israel and Palestine, but again, recently, Azerbaijan has conducted a military operation. Yes. To reclaim the territories that they consider to be their own. And so what we're seeing is that there is an understanding that you can settle some of the outstanding continuous grievances by military force, and that there will be no pushback from the international community, and there is nothing the international community will do. In fact, I think if the situation continues, we may see more conflicts emerging around the world, precisely because the attention is being given to some of the hot areas like the war in Ukraine, or is it the war in Gaza, the Israeli-Palestinian war. We may see more politicians, countries taking this opportunity to settle some scores and to settle some long-standing grievances, because they know that it is likely that they will get away with it, that the world's attention is elsewhere. So I would agree with you. It is very dangerous, and we cannot, as world, we cannot continue to exist in this way. It's destabilizing. It hurts the world economy, and I think there will be a push to come back to the equilibrium soon enough. Or else we will see a global crisis around the world.
Indeed, the world can't afford this to go more south than it already has. Thank you, Mr. Dinis Riva. Mr. Dinis Riva is a researcher at Institute for Security Studies in South Africa. Many thanks.
Thank you for having me.
You're watching our special coverage of the Israel-Hamas war. More reactions continue to trail U.S. President Joe Biden's speech to Americans to spend more money in helping Israel aid and also for Ukraine. Mara Rodman is a professor at the University of Virginia's Miller Center for Public Affairs and a former deputy special envoy for Middle East peace. She says President Biden is quite good in keeping his eye on the ball.
I would hope in the speech, and I believe he will do this, that he will explain why he's doing what he's doing on behalf of the United States, why it's important. I would also hope that it's not limited to the immediate conflict on the ground in Israel or between Israel and Hamas, but also that he draws the connections to what is happening in Ukraine with Russia's actions. And with the need to be clear to both Russia and China about the importance of standing with friends and allies, and of the need to not tolerate attacks on sovereign territory. So one of the things I actually think President Biden is quite good on in general, and will be in the circumstances, keeping his eye on the ball. In other words, let's come back to what's the United States' interest here? What am I doing to protect and defend the United States and the world, and thus ultimately help the safety and security of all Americans? And I believe that the way he is executing our policy, United States policy, towards what is happening right now in the region, has that firmly in mind. The protests, the ways in which, and I think it's folks at both extremes, frankly, are raising their voices, absolutely part of our democracy, but not what is going to be driving where the president is going on this policy.
During the past 2 weeks, the U.S. has been flying military support for Israel, including 2 Iron Dome missile defense systems it had previously purchased. This is according to Pentagon spokesperson, Brigadier General Patrick Ryder, who told the media that another number of artillery, ammunition, and other categories of critical equipment will be flown over to Israel in the following days. Iron Dome was developed by state-owned Rafael Advanced Defense Systems with U.S. backing to counter rocket fire from Lebanon that hit Israeli towns during the 2006 war with Hezbollah, and from Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, where Hamas took control in 2007. It became operational in 2011. Now, in August 2022, Israel says Iron Dome interceptors had shot down 97% of Palestinian rockets that engaged during a weekend surge of Gaza fighting.
Have been quickly provided to Israel. And with respect to U.S. support to Israel, the first shipments of military aid, including munitions, began arriving in Israel last week and continue to arrive on a near daily basis. This assistance is comprised of capabilities requested by Israel to include precision-guided munitions, such as joint direct attack munitions, small diameter bombs, 155 millimeter artillery ammunition, and other categories of critical equipment. In addition, Iron Dome interceptors from stocks that the United States has in country have been quickly provided to Israel. And in the days ahead, we'll be flowing additional Iron Dome interceptors so that Israel has the capabilities they need to sustain their Iron Dome defense systems and protect their citizens and cities from rocket attacks. We will leverage several avenues available to us to include our stocks and industry channels that reinforce the United States' unwavering and ironclad support for both the Israeli Defense Forces and the Israeli people. As always, the Department of Defense will continue to support, plan, and undertake these critical missions professionally and with the inherent right to protect our force.
Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department has called for sustained aid to enter Gaza, confirming Special Envoy David Satterfield met with Israeli and Egyptian officials on the issue. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller says the U.S., Egypt, and Israel are looking to develop the exact mechanism to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza. The Israeli government is worried about the possible diversion of aid to benefit Hamas, Miller says. He also defended the United States' veto of the United Nations Security Council resolution on Wednesday, October the 18th, that would have called for humanitarian pauses in the conflict between Israel and Hamas to allow humanitarian aid access to Gaza Strip. Washington traditionally shields its ally Israel from any Security Council action. The U.S. expressed disappointment. The draft resolution made no mention of Israel's rights to self-defense.
Ambassador Satterfield met with officials from the government of Egypt and the government of Israel today in Israel to negotiate the exact modalities by which we can implement the agreement that the president secured. So over the coming days, I think what you will see, can't get in the exact timing, but we expect it to be implemented soon, details for humanitarian aid to go in. And of course, if Rafah Gate is open to allow humanitarian aid to go in, we will be trying to get out the American citizens who are in Gaza who want to leave. Sustained humanitarian assistance going into Gaza for the benefit of innocent civilians. The exact discussions about how we implement that are exactly what Ambassador Satterfield is engaged in right now, so I wouldn't want to get ahead of those discussions, but it is our intention, our goal, and what we're working to secure is ongoing assistance to innocent civilians.
Why has it been so hard to get the Israelis to agree? You know,
the concern the Israeli government has, and they've said this publicly and they certainly said it privately to us, is that any assistance that goes in will be diverted once it's inside Gaza. That there's not an Israeli military force in Gaza, there's not a UN peacekeeping force in Gaza. The people with guns inside Gaza are Hamas. And so Hamas may try to divert this assistance and keep it from getting to the civilians who it is intended for. We think that's a legitimate concern. We've made clear that this aid needs to go to innocent civilians and not Hamas. We're going to be watching very carefully how it's delivered because we want to be sensitive to those concerns, which we share.
So you do.
What kind of protection is the United States willing to give the Palestinian civilian?
We have made very clear that we strongly support Israel's right to defend itself. We are going to continue providing the security assistance that they need to defend themselves. We think they have a right, not only a right, but an obligation to defend themselves against these terrorist attacks. I think any country would do that. But the president and the secretary have spoken to this very clearly, that we expect Israel to abide by all international law as they defend themselves, and we'll continue to work with them to ensure that they meet the highest standards.
New York State Governor Kathy Hochul has visited Kfar Aza kibbutz in Israel with Israel's Foreign Minister Eli Cohen. The kibbutz, just 3 kilometers from the Gaza Strip, was among the communities hit hardest by Hamas in southern Israel, which Israeli officials say has killed at least 1,300 people, mostly civilians, gunned down in their homes, on the streets as well, or at the dance festival. Before the October 7 attack, Kfar Aza was an Israeli farming community of about 750 people, many of them families with young children. Meanwhile, the New York governor, Kathy Hochul, says the Hamas attack on Israel is akin to the Holocaust, slaughter of innocent people. She is in Israel, where she met with diplomatic leaders and communities who have been devastated by the Hamas attacks. She says her trip is meant to be a gesture of solidarity and support for Israel. She's the latest Western leader to visit Jerusalem to show support for Israel and to try to negotiate a way to secure the release of hostages taken by Hamas and ease the provision of humanitarian aid to people in Gaza. Joining us now is Mr. Yinka Oyeniji, International Affairs Analyst from East Midlands in the UK. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you also for having me. Good morning.
Good morning. Let's start in Gaza, where the humanitarian scenario is dire. People are dying, people in hospital where supplies are low, there's an electricity absence, they're running on generators, there's food shortage, there's water scarcity. And as it stands, with President Biden securing a promise, or if we can call it that, an assertion from Israel that they will allow aid into Gaza. That hasn't happened yet. They also had a commitment from Egypt that 20 trucks will be allowed, where we inferred that was immediately, but that hasn't happened either. It appears that reservation of Israel that these aid will be diverted by Hamas to themselves seems to be the bone of contention.
Oh, well, we are again in wartime in Israel, okay, at the Gaza Strip. So we can't expect that things will happen normally. Things will happen on the spot. The moment developments won't be immediate. So it's a time of war. And then we have to try to chart a humanitarian corridor. It's not taken for granted. It's necessary. But you must understand, and this is where I'm a bit taken aback. It is right for countries to defend their territories, but it looks like Israel will not stop at anything to exact revenge. Now, again, there's nothing to say that Israel shouldn't rightfully try to revenge the attacks on its territory, but we should ask ourselves, okay, are there going to be any rules at this time that we are going to follow? As much as it is necessary for Israel to put a stamp on this and defend its territory, should we also reflect and then bring in the United Nations to say, you know what, can we start to even investigate this? Is this full-scale war already, or are we teetering at the edge of war? Is there a possibility? From the news I've been gathering since this started, I've not heard anybody say that we have investigated or we are on the trail of those who did this attack and all of that. I mean, it just looks as though we may lose control of the entire situation in a very short while. So we will get that corridor going. There's no doubt about it. But it may take a while. It may take longer than we think. And we have to put the plight of those people who need the aid in front of the media, so that we would underscore the importance of creating that corridor immediately. Will it happen? Yes. Can it happen immediately? No. It is not in anybody's interest not to even have a safe passageway for those who are going to provide reliefs. So we have to consider all of these situations before we embark on that necessary intervention for the people, whether on the side of Hamas or on the side of Israel.
For the sake of balance, Israel have said and again that they are not targeting civilians or the civilian population or even the civilian infrastructure, that all their airstrikes are targeted at Hamas locations or intelligence that they have about Hamas. And also, you said that are rules to be followed? Are there rules being followed? Well, what rules did Hamas follow when they invaded Israel? And that's the argument of the Israelis. What rules did Hamas follow when they invaded Israel and killed many civilians, as well as military personnel, and took civilian hostages? So that's the situation where the United Nations find itself in more than a dither.
Well, as it is, it's very unfortunate. There's no doubt about it. Okay, I mean, you've not asked me questions regarding where we even think this started from or how it started. As it is, as of this moment, there have been attacks and there are casualties. I would rather say on both sides. There's absolutely nothing to say. We can say, oh, the Israelis have suffered more casualties at this time. But that is not to say that the civilians who are on the Hamas territory are not also at danger of becoming casualties. We are definitely going to be having civilian casualties, vulnerable persons, women, men. It's a displacement that's going to go on for a very long time. But that being said, we can't then again sit back and just allow Israel overrun the Hamas, as much as that seems like what everybody wants at this time. There's no way that Israel will guarantee that its retaliatory attacks on the Hamas would not take civilian casualties. It's not done. Even if you are going after terrorists, when the United States went after Osama bin Laden, he had his wives and children, and it took ground attack and aerial support to be able to take out bin Laden and reduce civilian casualties that may have arisen. Now, at this time, Israel would need to reflect, and the United Nations has a role to play to ensure that the civilian casualties do not increase on that corridor. So, in as much as the Israeli government believes that it is entitled to retaliatory measures, it still cannot embark on a genocide, even though it can rightly say that it's been the first hit in this ongoing war as it is. So the international community has a role to play to investigate and be exact on how a coordinated attack can be carried out. Israel cannot just overrun Gaza and overrun Hamas without following the rules of engagement.
Surely, if Israel wanted to overrun Gaza, it will have done that already. Obviously, they are still trying to targeted precision attacks in certain places, but as it is easy for anyone to decipher, that is almost an impossibility. And as you've just mentioned, that there won't be casualties on both sides. How concerned are you about the hostages that are currently in Hamas captivity? And there's not much being said by Hamas about their release, as negotiations have not even begun yet.
It's very difficult to see. I've not been able to watch the videos. I don't think that I'm brave enough to see it. I've seen notices placed everywhere. I noticed the campaign to ensure that we keep this at the front burner. But again, I will tell you that the Israeli security before now had been the best in the world with regards to surveillance. It is unfortunate that that can be breached at the moment and we are not asking questions. It looks as though, as much as possible, it's very unfortunate, okay, to have people taking hostages. But this shouldn't have been so successful ordinarily. So we need to try to investigate how this became this successful, that they even took hostages. Because if it's been done before, it may be done again. And if not in Israel, it may be elsewhere. Personally, my personal opinion, there's definitely enemy within the ranks of the Israelis. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And we may have to toe that line to be able to secure the release of those who have been taken hostage. This had been building on for the past at least 6 months. The rabbi lost his wife and entire family members in a precise attack by people who claim to be Hamas about 6 months ago. Now, there were retaliatory attacks to that, but no investigation was done. We need to go back to the basics. How were these people taken? That will help us to determine how we can recover those who have been kidnapped. There's no gain overstating the fact that they are going to be used as pawns when negotiations begin. So what I would rather say is that as much as we concentrate on retaliatory attacks, we should investigate the cause. And then again, the international community should come into play. I see Saudi Arabia has been making moves. Iran has been making statements. China has been making statements. The United States has been making statements, all saying that Israel will have the retinue of armament it requires to fight back. I have not heard anybody say an envoy should step in to say, let us recover those who have been kidnapped. If Saudi Arabia is saying that we shouldn't shell the Hamas, then Saudi Arabia should be telling us that we are going to secure the release of those kidnapped. Even when we take prisoners of war, we also do prisoners exchange. We do swaps to release those who have been taken. What are the steps that we are exerting at this time, building up to ensuring that those who are alive and who have been taken forcefully are returned? I think that that should enjoy as much focus as we are building up armaments for retaliatory attacks by Israel.
That's such a difficult situation for the people in that region, especially in Palestine and Israel and around the world. Thank you, Mr. Yinka Oyeniji, who is an international affairs analyst for us from the East Midlands in the UK.
Thank you for having me, and have a great weekend ahead.
You too. Now, hundreds of demonstrators rallied in New York City's Times Square to demand the release of the hostages taken by Hamas during the October 7 deadly attack on Israel. This protest in Times Square was organized by a non-profit Israeli-American Council, which represents Israeli Americans in the U.S. Speakers including U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer, first Jewish Senate Majority Leader in history, vowed to stand with Israel and fight back against Hamas. At the rally, Israel's ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan, criticized UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres' planned visit to the Rafah border crossing from Egypt to Gaza today.
When I went to Israel, the first thing I said is, Israel, America has your back. We will not abandon you. We will not leave you. We will fight with you side by side until the threat of Hamas is totally eliminated. Friends, the UN Secretary General will visit the Rafah crossing in Gaza. Right now, sadly, tragically, it seems that his top priority is giving aid to the terrorists who abducted our loved ones. Shame on him! Shame on him!
Also protested outside the Israeli embassy in Santiago, Chile, in support of Palestinians in Gaza. Protesters waved Palestinian flags while denouncing that Israel is committing genocide in its ongoing attack in the Palestinian Gaza Strip. Thousands have been marching in many cities worldwide over the past few days as Israel intensified its airstrikes at the besieged Strip since October the 7th. According to Palestinian health officials, the toll from the Israeli strikes on Gaza has risen to more than 3,500 dead and more than 12,000 wounded. Hamas seized about 200 hostages during its cross-border attack on Israel on October the 7th and killed about 1,400 people in the attack. And that's our coverage of the Israeli-Hamas war in the Middle East this morning. Thank you for watching. I'm Olumide Macaulay.